Heavy.com's Steve Bulpett report had Celtics fans completely shocked and disgusted at the thought of seeing someone like Jaylen Brown request a trade this offseason. But of course, that's exactly what we've been talking about here on CLNS Media, and we're going to continue that conversation right here at TD Garden. I am Josue Pavon alongside Bobby Manning. Bobby, we talked about this at the beginning of the season, right? I mean, this team, they were a 500 team last year, and if they go into this season or if they go into the offseason as another first-round knockout, that's a 500 team or somewhere close to it. I think it's not ridiculous to think that someone like Jaylen Brown may consider his options, or at least if there's another team waiting in the wing for someone like Jaylen, the Celtics could receive a phone call that could, you know, things could happen fast in the NBA, right, Bobby? So, I mean, I guess my question to you is, going into this report, I mean, what was something that crossed your mind? Like, do you think of another team that could actually potentially pull off a deal for Jaylen Brown, or do you think this is more of a Jaylen Brown's going to have to be really adamant and ask for a trade in order for any of this to even remotely happen?
Well, it's interesting. You don't know where the report's coming from, and I know a lot of people got up in arms. Oh, fake news, everything. Like, that's the new thing we're dealing with here. When fans don't like something, they don't like what's being said. But we believe in Steve. This is a guy that's been on the beat for years. He's well connected, and he had multiple sources here saying that Brown could be the one task out of this mix. So I'm not looking ahead to potential deals and things like that at this point. I'm just happy that potentially here Brown could be staking his claim as a player with cachet, a star on a max deal, pushing the organization to be better. Now, I think there's probably an underlying thing here as well, his confidence in himself, him being very confident that he could lead a team in his abilities and his ability to improve into the future and his all-star candidacy and all these different things. We think about Tatum as the A and Brown as the B, when they're really 1 and 1A more so here. And, you know, I think he's a guy that wants credit being 1A, you know, even if it's not one necessarily there. So I think that's an underlying factor here.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing to bring up. That's a good way to put it too.
And all we know right now, though, is that he wants to see this team get it together and play their potential. So my question is, what's this team's potential?
I think the bigger question at the end of the season would be, do you believe in this core? Do you want to be a Celtic? I mean, at the end of the day, I think those are sort of the questions that superstars ask themselves before they go ahead and hit that button, you know, because that's what happens in the NBA. I mean, it's a player-driven league. So if a player wants out, they normally get their wish in one way or another. So I don't think
it would clarify things for the Celtics, too, because we've talked about can Brown and Tatum play together. That might not have been the question as much as, do they want to play together and do they want to each share in the success here? Especially, you know, we've seen stars, Kobe and Shaq most notably, win championships together and still have different ideas what they want this to look like and move on from each other. These guys aren't even close to contending for a championship. So forget the report if you don't believe it, whatever. We're 2 years out from Brown's free agency. That alone should have people thinking, all right, what's he going to be thinking about this offseason when it comes to his future? What kind of things are going to be assuring the Celtics that he'll re-sign again? Because the worst thing you can do is get to his free agency or even the deadline before his free agency and lose him for nothing. Because then you're questioning Brown's future a year later if you're left high and dry without much talent around Tatum.
Right. I don't think most people are questioning the report, even though Celtics fans don't want to believe it. I think they do believe it, but I just don't think what you just said. I don't think they can picture Jaylen saying, I want out of this situation. I'm not happy here.
Steve affirmed himself. He's not asking out. He could.
Right.
That's all he's saying.
But Celtics fans read the headline and they completely, you know, they go the other way. They're like, well, that means that he wants out, or that means that he's thinking about wanting out. No, I don't think it means either. I just think it means the way the situation play itself out. If this team doesn't succeed or doesn't have a deep playoff run, sure, why wouldn't someone like Jaylen Brown at least consider something like that? Now, we talked about them believing in the core. Right now, I can understand why Celtics fans are so beside themselves when they hear something like this, because it's been the complete opposite. Like, everyone's been propping Jaylen up. Yeah. You got guys like Marcus Smart saying, like, man, this guy is getting everyone pumped up before games.
There's a sense of urgency in that locker room.
Exactly. There's a sense of urgency in that locker room, and it doesn't just have to do with the fact that Marcus is afraid that he might get traded, right?
Yeah, everybody's kind of on their toes and playing to the best of their abilities right now. And Tatum and Brown kind of hit a bump tonight in this Charlotte game. We talked about that in the other video from a scoring regard, but they're believing in this process. They're starting to pass to each other a lot more. They're establishing something right now. So you wonder, you know, you and John discussed this on the show, is this a matter of Brown saying, let's get some talent in here to help us, or is this him saying, let me help us more. Because that, we've heard Smart say something to that effect. Tatum's a given. I mean, he's always going to have the ball, so there's nothing for him to complain about. But Brown, he's sort of back in that finishing complementary role. Was he looking at the role that he was in when Tatum was out, playmaking and all these other things, and saying, that's who I could be? I don't know, because then all of a sudden you have an issue of Brown just maybe not being happy here whatsoever, because Tatum's always going to be the guy here, right?
So what you said earlier, I think it's the latter. I think Jaylen, and we talked about this, during the postgame show, what you just said. I don't think Jaylen's going into the trade deadline saying, "Oh man, you guys better address, this bench. You guys better address the back end of this rotation."
That's how I feel. So I'm hoping he feels
that's
that
how
way.
we feel. But he's like, man, those guys don't even matter. I mean, they do matter, but in his mind, he's like, I'm the difference maker. Tatum's the difference maker.
That's a great point.
Maybe Marcus is the difference maker. Like the three of us have to figure this thing out. And if this team does go deep into the playoffs, it's going to be because of us three, not because of who's on the end of the bench.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Brown, the reason I want him to be here is because of what he means off the court, too. The social justice efforts, and the brand that he has, whether it's his clothing or anything else that he's trying to establish himself as an individual in this league. And, that's not Brown being selfish. Everybody wants to do that. Every young star wants to be able to do that. So if he has an opportunity to have his own team, become, his own winner, establish a culture elsewhere, I always think that's going to be an interesting thing for him to pursue. And I think when we look at his free agency in a couple of years, that's certainly something he'll explore, right? So it's a very difficult situation for the Celtics to be in because this is Tatum's team. I think you have strong confidence that Tatum's always going to be here, even if things get rocky. Like, this is his team, his franchise, his city. That's never going to be the case for Brown, even if he reaches 1A status. So you can make it work between those two, but you don't want to get to a situation where Brown just leaves you high and dry. You could get a ton for Brown this offseason. He could get what he wants in a new franchise.
But none of this is ideal, okay? Just kidding. There's a disclaimer, guys, for you.
But if he does want to leave, you would rather do it sooner rather than later. So this is the good thing about him potentially demanding a trade and telling you, I don't intend to re-sign here. You'd rather have that than a Kyrie situation where you're guessing right until the last day and it's like, oh, crap, he went to Brooklyn.
Right. That's true. You know what? Again, we talked about it again, though. The core, I want
to make it work with Brown and Tatum first.
Exactly. And I want to see how this team looks after the trade deadline because, let's face it, Bobby, we've been covering the NBA long enough where teams, this is sort of that season, that time of the year where things get a little bit wacky. People are playing over their potential. Some people are playing, it's somewhere in between. You're not quite sure where they are. And then after the trade deadline, the chips fall where they may, and then everyone sort of either reverts back to their old habits or continues to what they were doing, right before the deadline.
Yep, and we've seen this team go on some stretches in the past, figure some things out, and revert to themselves. The lack of consistency this year has been their biggest issue, but we're now looking at a 14-game stretch where they've put it together here, especially on the defensive end. I mean, you can start to say that this is the best defense in basketball, I think.
10 out of 14 isn't bad, right? Well, at least for wins, and then you have what? I believe they're the third best, the third best defensive rating, right? Or top two.
They've moved into 2, and they're number 1 since the new year began, I believe, at this point. So they're an elite team at that end. You can see how much difficulty groups are having scoring against them. So the question you ask at this deadline is there any way to balance that out with the offensive end of the floor? Because you have a defensive unit that could really bother teams come playoff times. But as we've seen in the fourth quarters where they're 10-17 now in clutch time, basket making is what it's all about, and they've really struggled with that at times this year. So one way or another, this Brown report, I think, urges the Celtics to be a little more forward-facing and putting the best team possible on the floor here, because the one thing that is going to make Brown think about asking out a little bit more is more inconsistency, 500 play, and being nowhere close to contending.
Definitely. 1 week away. NBA trade deadline. You already know where to find all your Celtics coverage and news and updates at CLNS Media on YouTube. And, of course, visit us at clnsmedia.com. For Bobby Manning, I am Josue Pavon from TD Garden. We'll see you guys next time.